The desert sun fell like a hammer on the small Arizona town, turning the air thick and still. Dust hung in the spaces between buildings, clinging to rusted fence posts and abandoned cars that had baked too long under that relentless sky. The heat was the kind that made men move slow, that made decisions feel heavier than they should. Garrett Holloway wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, the same hand that had once held a rifle with absolute certainty. At 35, he carried himself like a man who had learned discipline the hard way and then forgotten why it mattered. His shoulders were broad but slumped just enough to suggest the weight of something invisible. His jaw was set in a line that looked permanent, carved there by years of keeping his mouth shut when words wanted to come out. He crouched beside a section of chain-link fence that had seen better decades, wire cutters working methodically through twisted metal. This was the work that came to him now. Broken things that needed fixing, sheds that needed clearing, jobs that paid cash and asked no questions about the 6 years he had spent in uniform or the 2 years since he had come back to this town with nothing but a duffel bag and a dog. The fence belonged to a rental property on the edge of town, the kind of place where people came and went without saying hello. Garrett had learned not to wonder about his neighbors. The less you knew, the easier it was to sleep. Beside him sat Rex. The German Shepherd was 7 years old now, his black and tan coat beginning to fade at the edges where the sun had done its work. His muzzle had gone gray in the past year, salt and pepper spreading like winter frost. But his eyes were still sharp, still watching everything with the kind of attention that never really rests. Rex had been with Garrett since the beginning. Since the days when Garrett would wake up at 3 in the morning with his heart pounding and his hands shaking, unable to remember where he was. Since the nights when silence felt louder than gunfire. Rex had stayed through all of it, a solid presence, when everything else felt like it was falling apart. People came and went. Rex stayed. Garrett finished the last section of fence and stood stretching his back. The metal scraped as he pulled the damaged section free and set it aside. He would weld the new piece tomorrow when it was cooler. Today was hot enough to make a man stupid if he pushed too hard. He reached for the water bottle in his truck bed, lukewarm now, but better than nothing. As he drank, Rex's posture changed. It was subtle, the kind of thing most people would miss. But Garrett had learned to read the day the way other men read the weather. Rex's ears went forward, rotating like radar dishes. His body went still. Not the stillness of rest, but the stillness of something locked onto a target. Garrett set the water bottle down slowly. Easy, boy. His own pulse kicked up, that old familiar surge of adrenaline he had learned to hate and depend on in equal measure. Rex did not make mistakes. If the dog sensed something, there was something to sense. The sound came faint at first, almost swallowed by the hum of cicadas that filled the desert air like static. A whimper. Weak and broken, rising and falling in a rhythm that spoke of pain. Not human, but alive. Rex pulled against the lead nails, clicking on the cracked concrete. Garrett let him move forward, following the dog's nose toward the back of the rental complex where weeds pushed up through gravel and the sun bounced harsh off corrugated metal siding. The heat back here felt heavier, trapped between walls that radiated warmth like ovens. Garrett's boots crunched on broken glass and dried weeds as he moved deeper into the narrow alley between buildings. The smell hit him before he saw anything. Old garbage, rust, and underneath it something else. Something wrong. Then he saw her. The German Shepherd lay tied to a steel post driven into the hard dirt. She was thin, her ribs visible beneath a coat that was matted with dust and dried blood. Her belly was swollen, unmistakably pregnant. One hind leg trembled as she tried to curl around herself, tried to make her body small and protected. Standing over her was a woman. She held a metal rod in one hand, something that might have been part of a rake handle once. Her posture was casual, almost bored, as if she were dealing with a household chore she had done 100 times before. The woman was in her early 40s, dressed too neatly for this kind of heat. Her hair was pulled back tight, not a strand out of place. Her skin was pale, untouched by the kind of work that left marks. She wore slacks and a sleeveless blouse that should have been wrinkled in this temperature, but somehow was not. When she raised the rod and brought it down across the dog's back, there was no anger in her face. No emotion at all. Just the cold efficiency of someone solving a problem. The sound the dog made was barely audible. A choked whimper that died in her throat. Garrett's voice cut through the heat like a blade. Stop. The word came out rougher than he intended, carrying the weight of every bad decision he had ever tried to prevent and failed. The woman turned slowly, taking her time as if she had been expecting company. Her eyes swept over Garrett from his dust-covered boots to his faded work shirt, cataloging him in a single glance. Her lips curved into something that might have been a smile, if smiles could be that empty. This is private property. Her voice was smooth controlled, with just enough edge to suggest she was used to being listened to. You don't have any right to be back here. Garrett took a step forward, every muscle in his body coiled tight. His hands stayed open, visible. Years ago, he had learned the cost of moving too fast, of letting anger make decisions for him. The scar tissue in his right shoulder was a permanent reminder. She's hurt. He forced his voice level, forced himself to breathe. She's pregnant. The woman glanced down at the pig as if noticing her for the first time. She shrugged, the gesture dismissive. Not my problem anymore. Rex moved closer, positioning himself between Garrett and the injured dog. A low sound rumbled in his chest, not quite a growl, but something close. A warning that did not need translation. The woman's eyes flicked to Rex and then back to Garrett. For half a second, something moved across her face. Recognition, maybe. Calculation. Then it was gone, replaced by that same empty smile. She stepped back deliberately, and as she turned to walk away, her foot caught something on the concrete. A small object skittered across the ground, spinning to a stop near Garrett's boot. Do what you want, she said, her voice flat and final. Just don't say I didn't warn you. She walked off into the glare of the afternoon sun, her footsteps unhurried, her posture straight. She did not look back. Garrett waited until she disappeared around the corner of the building before he moved. Then he dropped to one knee beside the injured dog, his hands gentle, as he worked at the rope that held her to the post. The knot was tight-tied by someone who knew what they were doing. As he loosened it, he could see the raw patches on her neck where the rope had rubbed through fur and into skin. She barely moved when he touched her, her breathing shallow, her eyes dull with exhaustion. Rex pressed close, whining softly. The sound was high and worried, the kind of sound Garrett had only heard from him a handful of times. It's okay. Garrett's voice was barely a whisper, though he was not sure who he was trying to convince. He slipped the rope free and lifted the dog carefully, shocked by how light she was. She should have weighed more, should have had muscle and strength. Instead, she felt like she was made of hollow bones and old scars. Rex followed close as Garrett carried her to his truck, parked in the shade of the only tree for 100 yards. He laid her down gently in the truck bed on the tarp he used for hauling scrap metal. She did not resist, did not even seem to register the movement. As he stepped back to catch his breath, his boot knocked against the object the woman had kicked. A phone, the screen was cracked, smudged with dirt and fingerprints. But when Garrett picked it up and pressed the power button, the display flickered to life. There was a message on the screen. Just one. Recent enough that it had not locked yet. Asset damaged. Removed before delivery. Garrett stared at the words, read them twice to make sure he understood, then a third time because understanding did not make them any easier to process. Asset, not dog, not animal. Asset. Removed before delivery. The cold feeling that settled in his chest was familiar. It was the same feeling he used to get in the field when something did not add up. When the pattern of a situation shifted from routine to dangerous in the space between one breath and the next. He looked down at the injured dog in his truck, at Rex who stood beside her with his ears forward and his body tense, at the phone in his hand with its single damning message. Somewhere in the cicada-filled heat, a line had been crossed. And Garrett knew, without fully understanding why, that picking up that phone meant there was no easy way back from this. He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and drove. The veterinary clinic sat beside the highway like something that had been there so long, people forgot to notice it anymore. One-story sun-faded paint, a flickering sign that read "More Veterinary Care" in letters that had lost half their color to the desert sun. Garrett pulled into the gravel lot and killed the engine. The heat followed him as he opened the door, wrapped around him like a blanket he could not shake off. He moved to the truck bed and lifted the injured dog again, cradling her against his chest. Rex jumped down and stayed close, his body a solid presence at Garrett's side. The clinic door chimed as Garrett pushed through. Inside, the air was marginally cooler, stirred by an oscillating fan that pushed warm air in lazy circles. The smell of antiseptic and old wood filled the small waiting room. A woman emerged from the back, wiping her hands on a towel. She was tall and lean, somewhere in her early 50s, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled into a loose bun. Her skin was sun-weathered, the kind of tan that came from years in this climate, not from vacations. Her eyes were sharp but kind, the eyes of someone who had delivered bad news enough times to know how to do it without making it worse. Dr. Helen Bradshaw had been the only vet in this town for as long as Garrett could remember. She had the posture of a woman who stood her ground quietly, who did not need to raise her voice to make people listen. What happened? She was already moving, clearing the examination table with practiced efficiency. Garrett laid the dog down gently, his arms aching from the weight he had carried. I found her tied up behind the Sycamore rental complex. His voice was rough. She was being beaten. Helen's jaw tightened. She ran her hands over the dog's body, her touch firm but careful. The dog whimpered once, a sound so small it almost disappeared, and then fell silent. Her sides heaved with the effort of breathing. She's close to term. Helen's voice was low controlled. And she's in rough shape. She pulled out clippers and shaved a small patch of fur, cleaned a wound with steady hands. Then she paused, frowning. These marks. She leaned closer, her finger tracing a small puncture on the dog's flank. They're not just from hitting. Garrett watched her closely. What do you mean? Helen straightened, pushing her glasses up the bridge of her nose. Injection sites, at least 2. Stimulants and sedatives, if I had to guess. Someone's been keeping her awake, then knocking her down. She reached for a handheld scanner, something Garrett had seen her use before on Lost Pets. She passed it over the dog's neck, moving slowly. A faint beep sounded, then nothing. Helen's frown deepened. There's a microchip here. Or there was. It's been scratched nearly clean. Garrett felt a slow burn settle behind his ribs, the kind of anger that did not come fast and hot, but built like pressure in a sealed container. So she's not a stray? No, Helen's voice was flat certain. And this isn't random abuse. She wrapped the dog in a thin blanket and adjusted an IV line with quick, efficient movements. The dog's breathing steadied slightly, her eyes half-lidded but alert. Garrett crouched beside the table, resting a hand on the floor. He did not touch the dog unless she moved first. When her head shifted weakly toward him, he swallowed hard. You're safe. The word felt fragile in his mouth. Rex lowered himself beside the table, his body forming a solid barrier. His ears stayed forward, rotating at every sound. The hum of the air conditioner, the distant traffic on the highway, the creak of the building settling in the heat. I need to document this. Helen pulled out her phone, started taking photographs, medical notes. If this goes where I think it might, the door opened. Amanda Brooks stepped inside as if she had every right to be there. She had changed her shoes, but not her expression. Her clothes were still neat, her posture still upright. Her dark blonde hair was still pulled tight at the nape of her neck. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, though no tears fell. When she spoke, her voice trembled just enough to sound convincing. That's my dog. She pointed toward the table, her finger steady despite the quiver in her voice. That man stole her. Garrett rose slowly, his movements deliberate. She was tied up and bleeding. Amanda turned to Helen, ignoring him completely. He trespassed. She's aggressive. I was trying to keep people safe. Helen did not move, did not blink. Ma'am, this animal is pregnant and severely injured. There are injection marks and a damaged microchip. Amanda's eyes flicked away for half a second, just long enough to notice. I don't know anything about that. Her voice hardened. I want her back. Rex stood, and the sound that came from his chest was low and deliberate. Not loud, not wild, just enough to draw a line in the air that everyone in the room could see. Garrett stepped between them. You're not taking her. Amanda's lips pressed into a thin line. You have no proof. Helen cleared her throat. Actually, I do. Medical records, photographs, and your behavior right now isn't helping your case. For a moment, Amanda looked as though she might argue. Her mouth opened, then closed. She forced a smile that did not reach her eyes. I'll be speaking to the authorities. She turned on her heel and walked out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. The door swung shut. Silence followed, thick and heavy. She's lying. Garrett said it quietly, not as a question, but as a fact. Helen nodded. Yes. Garrett exhaled slowly. He pulled the phone from his pocket and set it on the counter. I found this. She dropped it. Helen glanced at the screen. Her expression hardened when she read the message. That's not the language of a pet owner. No, Garrett looked at the dog again, at the rise and fall of her chest, at the way she tried to curl protectively around herself despite the exhaustion. That's the language of inventory. He was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke again, the words coming before he fully thought them through. She needs a name. Helen raised an eyebrow. You naming her already? Garrett hesitated, then nodded. Sunny, if she makes it through this heat, it feels right. Helen allowed herself a small smile. Sunny it is. As the afternoon light began to shift toward evening, Helen adjusted the monitors and checked Sunny's vitals again. She'll need rest. Minimal stress. If whoever hurt her comes back, it won't be for her health. Garrett stiffened. You think they'll try to take her? I know they will. Helen's voice was certain. Whatever she was used for, it didn't stop when she got pregnant. She became a problem. Garrett thought of the message on the phone. Removed before delivery. His stomach tightened. I can't leave her here. Not if she's a target. Helen studied him for a long moment. You have somewhere safe, Garrett pictured his small rental house. The peeling paint, the single working fan, the way Rex always lay facing the door. Safe enough, for now. Helen nodded slowly. Then take her. I'll document everything. If she goes into labor early, bring her straight back. As they stepped outside, the sky was beginning to burn orange and gold. The heat was finally loosening its grip, giving way to the cool that would come with night. Garrett laid Sonny carefully in the back of his truck. Rex jumped up beside her without being told, settling into position as if he had been doing this job his whole life. Before Garrett climbed into the driver's seat, he glanced back at the clinic. Something about today felt unfinished, like a door had opened that would not close quietly. He drove away as the sun dipped low, unaware that from a distance, a dark sedan sat idling near the highway. Its engine hummed softly, waiting. The daylight did not soften when Garrett pulled into the gravel drive of his rental house. The sun hung high and clean, a hard white coin in the sky. The heat shimmered off the hood of the truck as if the road itself were breathing. Garrett parked beneath the lone mesquite tree that offered more symbolism than shade. The house was small and tired. Peeling paint, a crooked porch rail, one window patched with clear plastic. But it was quiet, and quiet had become a kind of wealth to him. He carried Sonny inside with care, setting her on a folded blanket near the oscillating fan that pushed warm air in slow circles. Her coat was dull with dust and healing scrapes. Her eyes were watchful even as exhaustion pulled them closed. Rex paced once, then settled by the doorway. His broad chest was square to the hall, his ears pricked. He was 7 years old now, the black on his muzzle beginning to gray. But the discipline never left him. Garrett had learned the hard way that some instincts were earned and then kept for life. Garrett filled a shallow bowl with water and held it steady while Sonny drank. His hands shook, not from the heat, but from the weight of responsibility he had chosen. He told himself this was temporary, just until things cooled down. But the words felt thin. The message on Amanda's phone replayed in his mind, each syllable scraping. Remove before delivery, inventory language, not the language of mercy. He sat on the floor beside Sonny and breathed until the room felt less tight. The quiet let old memories creep in, long days under harsher suns, the discipline that had once kept his thoughts lined up like gear on a rack. He had left the teams with a commendation and a scar that never showed. A decision that saved his life and complicated it at the same time. Work came and went. People did not stay. Rex did, and now Sonny had arrived carrying a life that did not care about his past. By late afternoon, the first sign came. A sedan rolled past the house, slow enough to be noticed, then slower on the return. Its windows were dark, the paint an unremarkable gray that blended into everything. Garrett watched through the plastic-paned window, careful not to move. The car idled at the corner, then drove on. 10 minutes later, it returned and parked half a block away. Engine off. The clear sky offered no place to hide. Rex rose without a sound and stood beside Garrett, their shoulders nearly level. I see it. Garrett murmured more to himself than to the dog. He reached for his phone, took a photograph through the window's rippled plastic, then set the phone face down. Panic would not help. Pattern would. He moved with quiet purpose, setting his old motion camera on the shelf above the front door. He angled it toward the porch. Checked the back window and the side gate. Noted the loose hinge he had never gotten around to fixing. He did not arm himself. He chose visibility instead. Lights on, door unlocked, but watched. The kind of posture that said nothing was hidden. At dusk, a knock came. Garrett opened the door to find a man standing just beyond the threshold. His posture was casual, his smile rehearsed. He was in his late 30s, broad but soft at the edges. A trimmed beard framed a mouth too quick to grin. His baseball cap bore no logo. His eyes flicked past Garrett, searching. Evening, the man's voice was friendly, practiced. Name's Camden Shaw. I'm looking for a dog. Garrett let the silence do some of the work. Lots of dogs in this town. Camden laughed lightly as if embarrassed. This one's special. Black and tan. Belongs to a woman who's real worried. Behind Garrett, Rex shifted. Nails clicked once on the floor. Sonny made a low sound, protective and tired. Garrett's voice stayed even. You should talk to animal control. Camden's smile thinned. Lady asked me to ask nice first. And if nice doesn't work, Camden shrugged. Then I guess we keep looking. Garrett closed the door gently, not slamming it, not arguing. He watched through the camera as Camden lingered on the porch, peered at the frame, then walked away toward the gray sedan. The car pulled off without headlights. The day was still bright enough to make them unnecessary. Night did not bring cover. The moon rose early, in full bleaching the yard silver. Garrett slept in bursts on the couch boots, on keys in his pocket. Rex did not sleep at all. At midnight, gravel crunched near the side gate. Garrett rose and slipped into the hall, his heart steady, his breathing controlled. He heard a whisper, a curse when the loose hinge squealed. The back door opened a hand's width. A shadow leaned in. Rex moved first, not with a bark, but with a presence that filled the space. The man froze. Garrett flicked on the light. It was Camden Shaw again, his face pale now, bravado gone. "I don't want trouble." Camden's hands went up. "I just need to check. Check what Camden swallowed. The asset." Garrett stepped aside just enough for the camera to see. "Say that again." Camden's eyes darted to the lens. He hesitated, then exhaled. "I'm paid to recover animals. That one's marked. She's not supposed to be here." Marked by who? Camden looked at Sunny, at her swollen belly, and something in him wavered. "Amanda," he said it finally. "She handles the cleanups when something goes wrong." Garrett nodded once, recording every word. And pregnancy. Camden's mouth twisted. Complication. Garrett held the silence until it broke. "Leave. Now." Camden backed out, stumbled, and ran. The gray sedan started somewhere down the block and disappeared into the night without lights. Garrett sat on the floor after palms flat against the wood, feeling the echo of the moment. Sunny shifted and pressed her nose to his knee. He rested his hand on her head, a promise without words. Rex returned to the doorway and lay down, a wall with breath. By morning, the house was still standing. Garrett drove Sunny back to Dr. Bradshaw's clinic under the honest glare of the sun. Helen met them at the door, her eyes sharpening when she saw the set of Garrett's shoulders. "They came." Garrett said it simply. Helen nodded. "I expected as much." She examined Sunny, listening, counting breaths. "Stress isn't helping." Then she met Garrett's gaze. "But she's strong." As Garrett left, he noticed the same gray sedan parked across the highway, engine idling. A woman sat behind the wheel, sunglasses hiding her eyes. The heat bent the air between them. Garrett did not look away. Under a sky too clear to offer excuses, the game had changed, and Garrett knew it would not wait for night to make its next move. The afternoon arrived without mercy. Heat pressed against the windows of more veterinary care, flattening the air until even breathing felt deliberate. The small clinic's aging air conditioner rattled inside the walls, pushing out little more than warm relief. Outside, cicadas sang in relentless waves, a reminder that the sun ruled everything in this corner of Arizona. Garrett wiped his forearm across his forehead as he stood near the exam table. Sunny lay on her side atop a clean blanket, her breathing uneven now, her body tense with the unmistakable rhythm of labor. Her black and tan coat was damp fur clinging to her ribs. Her amber eyes were bright with pain and determination. She did not cry out. She bore down in silence, jaw clenched, as if instinct had taught her that weakness invited danger. Helen worked with practiced efficiency, her movements calm despite the oppressive heat. She had changed into fresh scrubs that morning, but sweat already darkened the fabric at her collar and along her spine. Her hands moved with the confidence of 3 decades treating animals in crisis. "She's strong." Helen's voice was steady as she checked Sunny's vitals again. "But this heat isn't helping. We need to keep her as calm as possible." Rex lay pressed against the side of the table, his broad back forming a quiet wall. His ears rotated at every sound, the rattle of the air unit, the hum of traffic beyond the highway, the scrape of boots outside the clinic door. Garrett noticed it at the same moment Rex did. Footsteps, multiple pairs, moving with purpose. The clinic door swung open hard enough to make the bell rattle against the frame. Vanessa Blackwell stepped inside sunlight, framing her like a spotlight she had not earned. She wore a sleeveless cream blouse and dark slacks, her posture rigid despite the heat, her face pale beneath carefully applied makeup. 2 men followed her, in both tall, both broad-shouldered, dressed in work jackets that made no sense in this temperature. Their eyes moved quickly, measuring the room, cataloging exits and obstacles. "There she is." Vanessa pointed towards Sunny as if indicating a misplaced package, her voice shaking with manufactured urgency. "I'm here to take her." Garrett stepped forward, planting himself between Vanessa and the table. His voice was level, but his muscles were coiled tight. "She's in labor." Vanessa's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's not your concern." Helen straightened from where she had been monitoring Sunny's contractions, folding her arms across her chest. "It's very much my concern. This animal is under my care and she's not going anywhere." Vanessa laughed, the sound sharp and humorless like glass breaking. "You're a vet in a rundown clinic in the middle of nowhere. You don't get to decide what happens to my property." Sunny let out a low, strained sound, her body tightening with another contraction. The sound cut through the tension in the room like a knife. Garrett felt something snap into place inside him. Not anger, not panic, but the kind of cold clarity he used to feel in the field when a situation was about to turn dangerous. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the cracked phone Vanessa had dropped behind the rental complex days earlier. He did not raise his voice, did not make threats. He simply tapped on the screen with deliberate movements and turned it outward, starting the live stream. The camera captured everything. The overheated clinic with its flickering fluorescent lights. The trembling bag on the exam table sides heaving with labor. The woman in expensive clothes demanding possession. The two men looming behind her like hired muscle. Garrett held the phone steady, his face calm, his voice carrying the same even tone he had used 1,000 times before when de-escalating volatile situations. This is a pregnant German shepherd. He spoke quietly as if telling a story to a friend across a table. She was tied up, beaten, drugged, and left in the sun to die. And this woman says she owns her. Vanessa's eyes went wide. Her hand shot out. Turn that off. The words came out sharp, the manufactured emotion dropping away to reveal something colder underneath. Turn that off right now. Garrett did not move. The phone stayed level, the camera capturing Vanessa's face as her composure began to crack. And this he continued, angling the phone to show Sonny's scarred legs, the healing wounds, the injection sites Helen had documented, is what was done to her. Outside, the cicadas continued their relentless song. Inside the clinic, time seemed to stretch and compress at once. The air felt heavy, charged with the kind of tension that precedes violence or revelation. Sonny pushed again, her body moving with ancient instinct. Helen moved instantly, her hands gentle, but sure, guiding and supporting. A small, wet shape slipped free, followed by a thin cry that barely rose above the hum of the struggling air conditioner. The first puppy lay still for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. Then it squirmed weakly, its tiny body slick and fragile. Come on, little one. Helen's voice was soft as she rubbed the pup gently with a clean towel, stimulating its lungs, clearing its airways. The puppy let out another sound, more breath than voice, but it was alive. Rex stood and leaned forward, his nose twitching as he took in the scent of new life. His eyes remained locked on the newborn, as if he were counting each small movement, each shallow breath. Vanessa's careful composure finally shattered. This isn't what you think. She took a step backward, her voice rising. She's dangerous. She attacked me. I was protecting myself. Stop. Helen's voice cut through the clinic like a blade sharp and clean. Just stop lying. The live stream chat began to fill with comments, names, and messages flashing past too fast to read. Somewhere out in the digital world, someone had shared the link. Then someone else. The number of viewers climbed steadily. 50, 200, 500. Vanessa seemed to realize too late that she was being watched by more than just the people in this room. That there was no script she could follow, no performance that would erase what the camera had already captured. Sonny strained again, her body moving with the rhythm of life itself. A second puppy arrived, this one stronger, its cry sharp and insistent as it announced its presence to the world. Helen worked quickly, clearing its airway, checking for abnormalities, then placing it beside its sibling near Sonny's warmth. Then a third puppy came, smaller than the others, emerging almost silently. It did not cry, did not move, just lay there, its tiny chest barely fluttering. That one's weak. Helen's brow furrowed with concern as she lifted the puppy carefully. We need towels, warm towels, now. Garrett moved without thinking, setting the phone down on the counter, where it continued to stream the camera, now capturing the scene from a fixed angle. He grabbed the stack of clean towels Helen kept in a warming cabinet and brought them to her. His hands were steady despite the heat, despite the eyes watching through screens hundreds or thousands of miles away. Helen wrapped the smallest pup, gently rubbing it with careful pressure, trying to stimulate its lungs, trying to coax it into taking that first crucial breath. Garrett held the bundle close to Sonny's belly, letting the mother's warmth surround the struggling newborn. The puppy did not cry, but its chest continued to flutter, faint but persistent. Rex lay down beside the table, his body aligned perfectly with Sonny's, creating a barrier of fur and muscle and loyalty. His dark eyes never left the weak pup, as if he could will it to keep fighting through sheer force of attention. Vanessa stumbled backward as sirens began to wail faintly in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Someone outside the clinic shouted something unintelligible. One of the men who had come with Vanessa muttered a curse under his breath and moved toward the door. You did this. Vanessa's voice broke as she pointed at Garrett, her fingers shaking. You don't know what you've ruined. You don't understand what you've done. Garrett looked at Sonny, exhausted and protective, despite her pain. He looked at the three fragile lives pressed against her warmth, each one fighting to survive. Then he looked back at Vanessa, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute certainty. No, you did this. The police arrived moments later, their cruisers pulling into the gravel lot with lights flashing red and blue against the white walls of the clinic. Officers emerged, uniforms dark against the glare of the afternoon sun. They took in the scene through the open door, the phone still streaming on the counter. The veterinarian's detailed notes spread across the workspace. The exhausted dog surrounded by her newborn puppies. Deputy Catherine Dalton was among them, her sharp eyes assessing everything in seconds. She had been a cop in this town for 20 years, long enough to recognize the difference between a domestic dispute and something darker. She walked to Vanessa with measured steps. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me. Vanessa tried to summon the persona she had worn so carefully. This is a misunderstanding. That man stole my dog. I have paperwork. I have save it. Kit's voice was flat. We'll sort it out at the station. Vanessa was led out without ceremony, her protest growing fainter as she was guided into the back of a patrol car. The two men who had accompanied her were questioned separately, their stories already beginning to diverge from hers in small but telling ways. When the doors finally closed and the police cruisers pulled away, the clinic felt impossibly quiet. The cicadas continued their song outside. The air conditioner rattled on, fighting a losing battle against the desert heat. The live stream kept running, comments still flooding in from viewers who had witnessed everything. Garrett's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the phone. The viewer count had climbed past 50,000, then 70,000. Then the numbers stopped updating, overwhelmed by the sudden surge of attention. He ended the broadcast with a single tap. Helen rested her head against the counter for just a moment, eyes closed, allowing herself one brief second of exhaustion. Then she straightened and returned to Sunny, checking each puppy methodically, making notes on her clipboard. The smallest puppy lay curled against Sunny's belly, its breathing shallow but steady. Alive despite everything. Garrett sank onto the worn chair in the corner, feeling the adrenaline drain from his system all at once. He watched the sun slide lower in the sky through the clinic windows and understood something with perfect clarity. In this town, under this relentless light, the truth had nowhere left to run. But the silence did not last. Within the hour, Helen's phone began to ring. News outlets wanting statements, animal welfare organizations offering assistance, people calling to donate money to volunteer to help in whatever way they could. Helen ignored most of them, letting the calls go to voicemail. But one call she answered. When she hung up, she turned to Garrett with an expression he could not quite read. That was FBI. They're sending agents. They want to interview both of us. Garrett nodded slowly. When tomorrow morning? Helen paused. They said the live stream was being shared across the country, that it had reached some kind of tipping point. What does that mean? It means people are paying attention. And when people pay attention, things that were hidden in the dark start coming to light. By the time the sun had dropped below the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and ash, the clinic had transformed. No longer just a place of healing, but something else. A focal point. A catalyst. Helen worked quietly through the evening, checking each puppy, making detailed notes. The first two pups were strong now, squirming against Sunny's belly with surprising energy for newborns. But the third, the smallest, remained concerningly still. Its breathing was shallow, each rise and fall of its tiny chest a small victory against the odds. Garrett stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the parking lot. The police had left hours ago, but news vans had arrived to take their place, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like metal flowers seeking sun. You know they'll come back. Helen's voice broke the silence. Garrett turned from the window. Whoever Vanessa was working for. Helen set down her clipboard and met his eyes. This wasn't her operation. She's just one piece of something bigger. Garrett had been thinking the same thing. The message on the phone. The way Camden Shaw had spoken about facilities, plural, as if this were just one location among many. The smooth efficiency with which Vanessa had tried to reclaim Sunny, as if she had executed this same task a dozen times before. You think there are others? It was not a question. Helen moved to the small sink and washed her hands, the water running brown for a moment before clearing. I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen abuse. I've seen neglect. People who don't know better. People who don't care enough. But injection sites, scratched microchips, coordinated attempts at recovery. That's not someone losing control. That's a system. The words settled in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. System. Cold and deliberate and organized. The kind of thing that did not stop when one person got arrested. The kind of thing that had roots spreading deeper than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Garrett thought about the gray sedan that had circled his house in the days after he found Sonny, about Camden Shaw, who had come back twice caught between fear and obligation, about the way Vanessa had looked at Sonny, not with the hot rage of someone personally wronged, but with the detached calculation of someone managing inventory that had depreciated in value. What do we do? The question came out quieter than he intended. Helen was silent for a long moment, drying her hands on a clean towel. Then she reached into a drawer beneath the counter and pulled out a business card. It was worn at the edges, the ink slightly faded but still legible. There's a woman, investigative journalist out of Phoenix. She's been looking into puppy mills and breeding operations for years. Helen held out the card between two fingers. Her name's Evangeline Thorne. People call her Eva. Garrett took the card and studied the name printed in simple black font. You trust her? As much as I trust anyone who asks the right questions and doesn't stop until she gets answers. Helen turned back to Sonny, adjusting the blanket around the sleeping pups. If there's a story here, she'll find it. And if there's a bigger operation behind all this, she'll expose it. Garrett slipped the card into his pocket. The small rectangle of paper felt heavier than it should, weighted with implication and consequence. Outside, full darkness had fallen. The kind of darkness that only exists in the desert far from city lights, where the stars press down like witnesses to everything that happens below. Helen checked the smallest puppy again, her fingers gentle as she placed a stethoscope against its tiny ribcage and listened. The heartbeat was there, faint but steady, a small drum, keeping rhythm with life itself. He's a fighter. Helen's voice carried something that might have been hope. Just needs time. Garrett crouched beside the table, close enough to see the pup's miniature paws perfectly formed despite their fragility. Close enough to see the way its nose twitched in whatever dreams newborns might have. He thought about giving it a name, making that kind of commitment. But names felt like promises, and he was not certain yet what promises he could keep. Rex shifted his position, his graying muzzle lowering to rest near the smallest pup. The gesture was protective, almost paternal. Garrett had never seen his dog behave this way before, had never seen Rex take on this kind of guardian role with such deliberate intention. You've got a new mission, don't you, boy? Rex's tail thumped once against the floor, a single beat of acknowledgement. Helen straightened, pulling off her examination gloves and dropping them in the waste bin. I'm going to stay here tonight. Keep monitoring them. You should go home. Get some rest while you can. Garrett shook his head. I'll stay. Helen did not argue. She had learned over the years that some people needed to see things through, needed to maintain their vigil, even when logic said they could step away. She simply nodded and moved to the small back room where she kept a cot for nights like this. She returned with 2 blankets, handing one to Garrett. Couch is yours. Try not to think too loud. These walls are thin, and I need at least a few hours of sleep. Garrett took the blanket and settled onto the worn couch near the front window. It smelled like antiseptic and old fabric and the accumulated weight of years, but it was better than nothing. He lay on his back, staring at the water-stained ceiling tiles, listening to the sounds of the clinic settling into night. The hum of the refrigerator in the back room, the occasional whimper from Sonny as she shifted to accommodate her puppies. The steady, reassuring rhythm of Rex's breathing. Sleep did not come easily. His mind kept circling back to the same questions, wearing grooves in his thoughts, like water over stone. Who was Vanessa working for? How many other dogs were out there right now, tied up and beaten, and waiting for someone to find them? And what would happen when the people behind this operation realized that Garrett was not going to let it go, was not going to walk away and pretend he had not seen what he had seen? Somewhere around 2 in the morning, Garrett's phone buzzed against his chest where it rested in his shirt pocket. He had turned it back on hours ago just in case. The screen lit up with a notification that cut through the darkness of the clinic. An email. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but the subject line stopped him cold. I saw your stream. We need to talk. Garrett sat up slowly, careful not to make noise that might wake Helen in the back room. He opened the email. It was short and direct, written with the efficiency of someone who did not waste words. My name is Evangeline Thorne. Dr. Bradshaw gave me your contact information. I've been tracking breeding operations in the Southwest for 3 years. What you found today isn't isolated. It's part of something much bigger, much more organized than most people realize. If you're willing to help me connect the dots, where I can show you how deep this goes, call me when you're ready. A phone number followed, nothing else. Garrett stared at the screen for a long time, watching the blue light reflect off his hands. Then he glanced toward the exam room where Sonny and her pups slept under the watchful presence of Rex and the distant monitoring of Helen. He typed a response, keeping it brief and careful. I'll call tomorrow. He sent it, then turned the phone off again and lay back down. But sleep remained elusive, staying just beyond reach, like something he could see but not touch. Morning came slowly, as if the desert itself was reluctant to face another day of punishing heat. The sun crept over the horizon in shades of gray and gold, painting the sky in colors that would burn away within the hour. Garrett woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Helen moving around the clinic with practiced quiet. He sat up, his back stiff from the inadequate couch, and rubbed his face with both hands. Rex was still in the exam room, lying in exactly the same position he had held all night. The dog had not left his post, had not abandoned his self-appointed duty. Helen appeared in the doorway holding a chipped mug. "You look like hell. Feel like it too." She handed him the coffee, black and strong, the way she had learned he preferred it. "How are they?" Garrett asked, nodding toward the exam room. "Stable." Helen's voice carried cautious optimism. "The smallest one made it through the night. His breathing is still shallow, but it's more regular than it was. That's a good sign." Garrett stood his joints, protesting the movement, and walked to the doorway. He looked in at Sunny and her pups, at this small family that had somehow become his responsibility. The smallest puppy was nestled close to Sunny's belly, its tiny body rising and falling with each breath. It looked marginally stronger than it had the night before. Not much, but enough to notice if you were paying attention. "He's going to make it." Garrett's voice carried certainty, not hope. A statement of fact rather than wishful thinking. Helen joined him in the doorway, coffee mug cradled in both hands. "You sound sure." "I am." They stood there together in companionable silence, watching the small drama of survival play out in miniature. Then Helen spoke again, her tone shifting to something more serious. "That reporter, Eva Thorne, she called me early this morning, said you were going to reach out." Garrett took a sip of his coffee, the bitter heat cutting through the fog in his head. "I am. Be careful with her." Helen's eyes remained on the puppies as she spoke. "She's very good at what she does. Maybe the best investigative journalist I've ever met. But she's relentless. Once she gets her teeth into a story, she doesn't let go until she's torn it open and exposed everything inside. Make sure you're ready for that before you pull her into this. Sounds like someone else I know." Helen smiled faintly. "Fair enough." Garrett pulled out his phone and dialed the number from the email. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered, crisp and alert despite the early hour. "This is Eva." Her voice carried the kind of efficiency that came from years of working to deadlines, of condensing complex stories into their essential truths. "Garrett Holloway, you emailed me about the dog." "I did." There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling in the background. "I watched your live stream. So did 50,000 other people. That kind of attention doesn't happen by accident, and it definitely gets noticed by people who don't want to be noticed. That's what I'm worried about. You should be." Eva's tone sharpened, became more focused. "But it also means we have leverage now. People care about what they saw. They're angry. And anger, when it's properly directed, is incredibly useful fuel." Garrett leaned against the counter, watching through the window as the sun continued its relentless climb. "What do you need from me?" "Everything. Records, photographs, names, timelines. Anything and everything you can give me about Vanessa Blackwell and whoever she's working with. I need to see the phone, the messages, the contacts. I need your account of what happened. Helen's medical documentation, the police reports when they're filed. I've got the phone." Garrett glanced at the cracked device sitting on Helen's counter, still tagged as evidence but not yet collected. "Messages, contacts, call logs. It's all there." "Good, that's a start." Eva paused and Garrett could hear her typing something. "But we need more than one data point. I need to see the facilities. The places where they're keeping the other dogs. You think there are more?" "I know there are." Eva's voice carried absolute certainty. "I've been tracking this network for 3 years. Vanessa Blackwell isn't at the top of the food chain. She's middle management at best. And middle management always leads somewhere higher." Garrett thought about Camden Shaw, about the fear in his eyes when he had mentioned other facilities. "There's a guy, Camden Shaw. He tried to take Sunny from me twice. Said something about other locations, talked about them like they were common knowledge." Eva's voice sharpened with interest. "Did he say where?" "No. But he's scared. I could see it in everything he did. Scared people talk, especially when they realize they're going down, whether they cooperate or not." Eva's tone carried a note of approval. "If we can find him before Vanessa's people do, we can get him to flip. Give us locations, names, the whole structure." Garrett was quiet for a moment, thinking through the implications. "What's your plan?" "I drive down this afternoon. Meet you at the clinic. We go through everything you've got, build a timeline, identify the gaps in what we know. Then we start connecting dots until we can see the whole picture. And if the people behind this don't want their dots connected, Eva's laugh was dry and humorless. Then they're going to have a very bad week. Garrett ended the call and set the phone down on the counter. Helen was watching him from the doorway, her expression thoughtful. She's coming this afternoon. Helen nodded slowly. Then we better get organized. The rest of the morning passed in focused preparation. Helen printed out all of Sonny's medical records, organized the photographs she had taken of the injuries and injection sites, made copies of everything for both the police and Eva. Garrett went through the messages on Vanessa's phone, systematically taking screenshots of anything that seemed relevant, building a digital paper trail. Rex remained with Sonny, a constant presence. The puppies slept and nursed in the eternal cycle of newborn life, their tiny bodies growing stronger with each passing hour. By the time noon arrived, the parking lot was no longer empty. 2 news vans had set up in the gravel lot, their crews standing in whatever shade they could find, cameras ready, waiting for a statement that was not going to come. Helen locked the front door and pulled the blinds down over the windows. We're closed for the day. Let them film an empty building if they want. Garrett stood at the window watching the reporters through a gap in the blinds. One of them was setting up a tripod. Another was speaking into a microphone, gesturing toward the clinic as if explaining a siege. They're going to turn this into a circus. Let them try. Helen's voice was firm with conviction. We control the narrative, not them. We have the facts, the evidence, the documentation. They have speculation and the need to fill airtime. At exactly 2 o'clock, a silver sedan pulled into the lot, navigating around the news vans with practiced ease. A woman stepped out, tall and lean, probably in her late 20s. She had dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail and wore jeans with a blazer, moving with the kind of confidence that came from years of walking into places where she was not wanted and refusing to leave until she got what she came for. Evangeline Thorne. She knocked on the locked door and Helen let her in quickly, relocking it behind her. Eva's eyes swept the clinic in a single comprehensive glance, taking in the layout, the equipment, the makeshift sleeping area Garrett had used. Then she turned to Garrett and extended her hand. Garrett Holloway. He shook her hand. Her grip was firm, businesslike. Yeah. Eva allowed herself a brief smile. Let's get to work. They spread everything out on the exam table in the main room, away from where Sonny and her pups rested. The phone with its damning messages, the photographs Helen had taken, the medical records documenting systematic abuse. Eva went through it all methodically, making notes in a leather-bound notebook, asking questions that cut straight to the heart of what mattered. This message. She held up Vanessa's phone, indicating the text they had all read a dozen times. Asset damaged. Removed before delivery. That's not the language of dog breeding. That's trafficking terminology. Asset. Delivery. This is inventory management. That's what I thought. Garrett leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Eva pulled out her laptop and started typing with the kind of speed that suggested she could think and transcribe simultaneously. Within minutes, she had pulled up records that Garrett would not have known how to access. Business licenses, property deeds, incorporation documents, surveillance footage from public cameras near the rental complex where Garrett had found Sonny. Vanessa Blackwell owns 3 properties in Arizona. Eva turned the laptop toward Garrett so he could see the screen. 2 more in Nevada, 1 in Utah. All of them registered under different shell companies, but all the shell companies link back to the same registered address in Phoenix. Garrett leaned closer, studying the information. What's at that address? A warehouse. Eva's fingers moved over the keyboard again, pulling up satellite imagery. Industrial district on the east side, registered as a general storage facility. But I've had my eye on it for 6 months. I've watched vehicles come and go. I've seen dogs being transported in and out. They go in, but they don't come out. At least not through any entrance I can see. Helen joined them at the counter, looking at the screen over Garrett's shoulder. You think that's where they're keeping the others? I know it is. Eva's voice carried the weight of certainty built on months of careful observation. I just haven't been able to prove it. Haven't been able to get inside or get anyone to talk about what happens there. Garrett stared at the address displayed on the screen, at the satellite image showing the warehouse and its surrounding buildings. Then he looked back at Rex, still maintaining his vigil beside Sonny and her pups. We need to go there. Eva met his eyes and something passed between them. An understanding, a shared recognition that they had both reached the same conclusion. Yes, we do. Helen's voice cut through sharp and clear. That's dangerous. If they're willing to beat a pregnant dog half to death and send armed men to threaten you, they're not going to just let you walk into their facility and start taking photographs. Garrett's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his skin. Then we don't walk in. We find another way. Eva closed her laptop with a decisive snap. I have a contact. former animal control officer who owes me more than one favor. If I can convince him to request an official welfare check, we might be able to get inside with legal backing. How long will that take? A day, maybe two. He's careful about sticking his neck out, and he'll want documentation before he acts. Garrett shook his head. We don't have 2 days. Camden said something about a buyer. If they're moving product, if they're about to transport dogs out of state or out of country, we need to move faster than that. Eva's expression hardened into something determined and unyielding. Then we moved tonight. The sun was setting when they finalized the plan, painting the desert sky in shades of burning copper and deep violet. Ava would drive to the warehouse with Garrett. They would scout the perimeter, document what they could see, gather photographic evidence. If they witnessed anything illegal, anything that suggested imminent danger to animals, they would call the authorities immediately. Helen would stay at the clinic with Sunny and the pups. She would monitor the live stream comments that were still pouring in, looking for any useful information from viewers who might have knowledge of similar operations. She would be their lifeline, their connection to help if things went wrong. Rex would go with Garrett. That part was non-negotiable. As they prepared to leave, Helen pulled Garrett aside in the clinic's narrow hallway, her voice low enough that Eva would not hear. Be careful. Her eyes searched his face with an intensity that made him pause. These people have already shown they're willing to hurt animals without hesitation. Don't give them a reason to escalate to hurting people. Garrett nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. I'll be careful. Helen's expression softened slightly. You're a good man, Garrett Holloway. Better than you give yourself credit for. Don't forget that out there. He did not know what to say to that, so he simply squeezed her shoulder once before turning to follow Eva to her car. Before Garrett climbed into the passenger seat, he glanced back at the clinic. Through the window, he could see Sunny lying with her pups, all of them safe for now. The smallest one still nameless, still fighting. For a moment, he considered turning back, staying where it was relatively safe, letting someone else handle what came next. But then he thought about the message on Vanessa's phone. Asset damaged, removed before delivery, cold and clinical. The language of people who saw living creatures as nothing more than inventory to be managed and disposed of. He thought about the other dogs, the ones still tied up somewhere, still waiting, still suffering. He climbed into Ava's car. She started the engine and they drove into the gathering darkness. The drive to Phoenix took 2 hours through desert that stretched flat and empty under a sky that deepened from purple to black. Ava drove with focused precision, her hands steady on the wheel, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but asphalt and the occasional tumbleweed rolling across their path. Garrett sat in the passenger seat, Rex in the back, with his head resting on the center console between them. For the first half of the drive, neither human spoke. There was not much to say. They both understood what they were doing, and they both understood the risks. It was Eva who finally broke the silence. Helen told me about you, about what happened before you came back here. Garrett kept his eyes on the road ahead. She say anything specific, just that you served? That you came back different? Eva's voice was matter-of-fact, not probing. That you've been looking for something to hold on to. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Yeah, something like that. You find it. He thought about Sunny, about Rex's unwavering loyalty, about the choice he had made to stop instead of walking past that day behind the rental complex. Maybe. Starting to. Ava nodded, seeming to accept that. For what it's worth, what you did with that live stream was smart. You created witnesses, made it impossible for them to make this disappear quietly. Wasn't trying to be smart, was just trying to show people what was happening. Sometimes those are the same thing. The industrial district materialized out of the darkness, like something conjured from the desert itself. Streetlights were sparse here, casting long shadows that pooled between buildings like spilled ink. The warehouse Eva had identified sat at the end of a cracked access road, surrounded by chain-link fence topped with coils of razor wire that gleamed dully under the weak lights. Eva killed the headlights as they approached, parking the sedan behind a defunct storage facility about a block away. She pulled out her camera, a professional-grade DSLR with a telephoto lens, and checked the settings with practiced efficiency. Stay low, stay quiet. We're just here to observe and document. Her voice carried the weight of experience. If we see anything actionable, we call it in and get out. We're not heroes. We're witnesses. Garrett nodded, though part of him bristled at the constraint. Rex jumped out when he opened the door, immediately falling into position at his side, years of training evident in every movement. They moved through the shadows, keeping to the edges of the access road, where gravel gave way to hard-packed dirt. The warehouse loomed ahead, a squat concrete structure with small windows set high in the walls. Light leaked from one of them, pale and flickering like a failing fluorescent tube. As they got closer, Garrett heard it. The sound that had led him to sunny days ago. Whimpering, low and broken and defeated. But not just one voice. Multiple dogs, their cries forming a chorus of misery that made his jaw clench. Eva raised her camera and started shooting the shutter, clicking softly in the darkness. Garrett moved to the fence, peering through the chain link at what lay beyond. In the dim light spilling from the building, he could make out shapes. Cages. Dozens of them arranged in neat rows like inventory in a warehouse, which is exactly what they were. Inside the cages, dogs. German shepherds, golden retrievers, Labrador retrievers, breeds that commanded high prices from the right buyers. Breeds that people paid thousands of dollars for, never knowing where they came from or what they had endured. All of them were thin. All of them were silent, except for those occasional whimpers that escaped despite their learned helplessness. Garrett's hands tightened on the fence until his knuckles went white. How many? Eva lowered her camera, her face grim in the darkness. At least 30 that I can see from here. Maybe more inside the building. A door opened on the side of the warehouse, spilling yellow light across the gravel lot. A man stepped out carrying a metal bucket that sloshed with each step. He walked to one of the cages, opened it without ceremony, and dumped something inside. Food perhaps, or water. He did not check on the animal, did not pause to see if it was sick or injured, just moved mechanically from cage to cage, completing a task he had clearly performed hundreds of times before. When he finished his circuit, he went back inside and closed the door. The yellow light vanished, leaving only darkness and the distant whimpering. Ava kept shooting her camera, capturing everything. We need to get closer. I need clear shots that will hold up in court. Garrett scanned the fence line, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. There. He pointed to a corner where the chain link had pulled away from its post, creating a gap just wide enough for a person to slip through. They moved along the perimeter, staying in the deepest shadows. Rex followed without a sound, his training and instinct working in perfect harmony. When they reached the gap, Garrett pulled the fence back carefully and slipped through. Eva followed, her camera slung over her shoulder. Inside the compound, the smell hit them like a physical force. Waste and decay, and something chemical that burned the back of the throat and made the eyes water. Garrett pulled his shirt up over his nose and mouth, breathing through the fabric as he moved toward the nearest cage. The dog inside was a German shepherd female, her coat matted and dull with neglect. She looked up at Garrett with eyes that held no hope, no expectation of rescue or kindness, just exhaustion and the dull acceptance of suffering. Garrett crouched beside the cage, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. The dog did not move, did not even acknowledge his words. Eva was photographing everything with systematic precision. The cages, the conditions, the dogs themselves. Her face was set in a hard line, her jaw clenched so tight that muscles jumped beneath her skin. Then they heard voices. Garrett froze. Eva lowered her camera. Rex's ears went forward, his entire body tensing into a coiled spring ready to explode into action. Two men emerged from the warehouse, walking toward the cages with the casual confidence of people who believed they were alone and safe. One was the man Garrett had seen earlier distributing food. The other was Camden Shaw. Garrett's pulse kicked up. He grabbed Eva's arm and pulled her behind a stack of empty shipping crates, pressing himself flat against the rough wood. Rex dropped low to the ground beside them, perfectly still. The men stopped near the center of the compound, close enough that every word carried clearly through the night air. Buyers coming tomorrow night. Camden's voice was tight with stress, with fear barely contained. Everything needs to be ready, all of them healthy enough to pass inspection. The other man grunted, a sound of acknowledgement rather than agreement. What about the one that got away? The breeding bitch. She's gone. Camden's tone was bitter, laced with frustration. That fucking seal and his dog made sure of it. Live streamed the whole thing. 50,000 people watched. Amanda's in custody. The whole operation is compromised. The other man swore a long string of profanity that echoed off the concrete walls. So what do we do now? Camden was quiet for a moment that stretched too long. Then he spoke, and his words made Garrett's stomach drop. We move everything tonight. Clean this place out completely. Burn the records. Scatter the inventory to the other facilities. Disappear before the feds show up asking questions we can't answer. Garrett's mind raced. They were going to destroy the evidence. Erase everything. Move the dogs to locations they did not know about, might never find. Eva was already moving, raising her camera, switching from photos to video. Getting it all on record. Every word, every admission. But then Rex shifted slightly, his paw scraping against a piece of metal debris. The sound was small. In any other circumstance, it would have been nothing. But in the tense silence of the compound, it might as well have been a gunshot. Camden's head snapped toward their hiding spot. "Who's there?" Garrett did not hesitate. Years of training took over the part of him that had learned to make split-second decisions in situations where hesitation meant death. He stood and stepped into the light, hands visible and empty. Camden's eyes went wide with recognition and fear. "You," Garrett kept his voice calm, controlled the way he had been trained to speak when negotiating with hostile forces. "It's over, Camden. The police are on their way." It was a bluff, a calculated gamble. But Camden did not know that. The other man's hand moved to his waist, reaching for something. Garrett saw it in the fraction of a second before the man pulled a gun free, saw the way his weight shifted, the way his eyes narrowed with lethal intent. Training took over. Garrett moved fast, covering the distance before the man could bring the weapon to bear. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it with precisely applied force, and the gun clattered to the concrete. A sharp jab to the ribs with his other hand. A sweep of the leg executed with perfect form. The man went down hard, the air exploding from his lungs. Camden turned to run, but Rex was already there, materializing out of the shadows like something summoned. The dog did not attack, did not bite. He simply positioned himself in Camden's path. Lips pulled back to expose teeth that gleamed white in the darkness, a low growl vibrating through the air that promised violence if necessary. Camden stumbled backward, hands shooting up in surrender. Okay, just call him off, please." Eva stepped into the light, her camera still recording, capturing everything. "You're going to tell us everything. Who you're working for, where the other facilities are, how this whole operation works, all of it." Camden's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool night air. "And if I don't," Garrett picked up the gun, with careful movements ejected the magazine, then tossed both pieces in opposite directions into the darkness, where they clattered and disappeared. "Then you go down alone. Take the fall for everyone above you. Or you cooperate and maybe the prosecutor goes easy on you when this all comes apart." Camden looked at the warehouse, at the rows of cages filled with suffering animals, at the evidence of his own complicity surrounding him on all sides. His shoulders sagged with the weight of defeat and terrible choices finally catching up with him. "There are 6 facilities total." His voice came out hoarse, defeated. "Arizona, Nevada, Utah, all owned by the same person." He swallowed hard. "Vanessa Blackwell." Eva's eyes narrowed, her journalist instincts immediately catching the discrepancy. "Vanessa, the woman they arrested was Amanda." Camden shook his head. "That's what everyone thinks. Amanda Blackwell was the face, the one who handled acquisitions and recovery. But Vanessa's her sister. She's the one who actually runs the operation. Stays behind the scenes, keeps her hands clean, lets Amanda take all the risk." Garrett felt the pieces clicking into place, the picture finally becoming clear. "Where is Vanessa now?" Camden's mouth twisted into something between a grimace and a bitter smile. "She's already gone. Flew out this morning as soon as she saw the live stream. Mexico, probably. She knew this was coming, knew it was time to disappear." Ava lowered her camera slightly. "But you stayed." Camden's laugh was hollow and broken. "I didn't have a choice. I'm in debt up to my neck. Gambling, bad investments, stupid decisions. Vanessa owns that debt. She owns me. If I run her, people find me, and I'm dead. If I stay, I'm dead. There's no winning play here." Garrett studied him, seeing not a monster, but a broken man who had made terrible choices and was finally facing the consequences. "You have one choice left, the only one that matters. Help us shut this down completely. Testify against Vanessa and everyone else involved. Give the feds everything they need to dismantle this network." Camden looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Eva must have called them during the confrontation, her phone in one hand, while the camera recorded with the other. Red and blue lights began to flicker against the buildings as police cruisers and FBI vehicles poured into the industrial district from multiple directions. Officers swarmed the compound with practiced efficiency, securing the scene, separating the suspects, beginning the methodical process of documentation and evidence collection. Animal control arrived with transport vans handlers, moving carefully among the cages, speaking in soft voices to dogs who had forgotten that humans could be kind. Garrett stood back and watched it all unfold, feeling strangely disconnected from the chaos. Rex sat beside him, calm now that the immediate threat had passed, his work done. Evia was giving a detailed statement to one of the FBI agents, handing over her camera, her notebook, everything she had gathered. The agent's expression grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the footage as the scope of what they had uncovered became clear. Camden was in handcuffs, but he was talking. Names spilled from him like water from a broken dam. Addresses, bank account numbers. The locations of the other facilities. The names of buyers who paid premium prices for stolen dogs with falsified papers. Everything he knew offered up in exchange for the possibility of mercy. Deputy Kit Dalton arrived just as the first transport van was being loaded with rescued dogs. She walked over to where Garrett stood, watching her uniform crisp despite the late hour, her expression unreadable in the flashing lights. "You've had quite a week." Garrett shrugged, suddenly feeling exhausted down to his bones. Seemed like the right thing to do. Kit glanced at the cages being systematically emptied, at the evidence being cataloged, at the operation being dismantled, piece by piece. "How many 43 dogs here?" The FBI agent who answered was a woman in her 30s, badge clipped to her belt, eyes sharp with professional focus. All stolen from breeders' kennels and private owners across 3 states. Some going back 2 years. Kit shook her head slowly. "Hell of a thing." Garrett's phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from Helen, simple and direct. "Sonny and the pups are stable. All vitals good. Come home when you can." He showed the message to Kit, feeling something unclench in his chest. "I need to get back." Kit nodded. "Go, we'll handle the rest. We'll need a full statement from you tomorrow, but tonight you've done enough." Eva walked over as Garrett turned to leave, Rex falling into step beside him. "You did good work tonight. We did good work. All of us." Eva allowed herself a tired smile. "I'm going to write this story. It's going to be everywhere. Every news outlet, every platform. People need to know what was happening here." Garrett thought about Sonny still recovering at the clinic, about the smallest pup still fighting for every breath. Just make sure they know this wasn't about me. It was about them, the ones who couldn't fight for themselves. Eva's expression softened with understanding. "I will." The drive back through the desert felt longer than the drive out, though the distance was the same. The adrenaline had drained from Garrett's system, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made his hands shake slightly on his thighs. Eva drove in silence, seeming to sense that he needed quiet to process everything that had happened. When they finally pulled into the clinic parking lot, the sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, that deep blue that comes before dawn. Helen was waiting outside despite the early hours, Sonny on a leash beside her, the dog moving slowly but steadily. The 3 pups were in a carrier at her feet. "How are they?" Helen's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. "Strong. All of them. Even the little one is starting to show some real fight." Garrett knelt beside the carrier and looked at the smallest pup. Its eyes were barely open, but it was moving with more purpose than before, squirming toward the warmth of its siblings. He reached in and gently lifted it, cradling the tiny body against his chest. The pup made a small sound, more breath than voice, but it was there. "You made it, little guy." Helen watched him with an expression he could not quite read. "You going to name him?" Garrett thought for a moment, feeling the fragile weight of the puppy in his hands, thinking about his grandfather, who had served in a different war, who had come home and built a life despite the scars. "Boone. After my grandfather. He was a fighter too." Helen nodded. "Boone it is." Over the following days, the story spread like wildfire across the country. Eva's article ran in newspapers from Phoenix to New York. The video from the warehouse raid was shared millions of times across social media platforms. People donated to animal rescue organizations in unprecedented numbers. Lawmakers in 3 states promised to close loopholes in breeding regulations and increase penalties for animal trafficking. Vanessa Blackwell was apprehended at the Mexican border, attempting to cross with falsified documents and a suitcase full of cash. She was extradited back to Arizona and charged with dozens of counts, including animal cruelty, racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy to commit trafficking. Camden Shaw testified in exchange for a reduced sentence, his detailed testimony leading to the arrest of 12 others involved in various aspects of the operation. Buyers, transporters, corrupt officials who had looked the other way for the right price. The warehouse was shut down permanently. The 6 facilities Camden had identified were raided simultaneously in a coordinated operation across 3 states. 97 dogs were recovered in total, each one receiving medical care and eventual placement in homes that had been thoroughly vetted. Garrett watched it all unfold from a careful distance, content to let the story belong to others. He had done what needed doing, and that was enough. What mattered now was here. Sonny, who grew stronger each day, her coat regaining its luster, her eyes losing that haunted look. Rex, who had found new purpose as guardian and teacher to the puppies. And the 3 pups themselves, growing and playing, and discovering the world. One afternoon, 3 weeks after the raid, a car pulled up to Garrett's house. A young woman stepped out, maybe 16 or 17, with dark hair and nervous eyes that kept darting around as if expecting threat from any direction. She walked to the door and knocked with a hesitant hand. Garrett answered, Rex materializing at his side as he always did. "Are you Garrett Holloway?" He nodded, studying her. "Can I help you?" The girl swallowed hard, her hands twisting together. "I'm Riley. Riley Shaw, Camden's daughter." Garrett's expression softened immediately. "Come in." They sat in the small living room, Riley perched on the edge of the couch like a bird ready to take flight at any moment. Her hands stayed clasped in her lap, knuckles white with tension. "My dad asked me to come see you." She spoke to her hands rather than meeting his eyes. "He said you were there at the end, at the warehouse. He said he gave you something and wanted me to have it." Garrett stood and walked to the shelf where he kept a few personal items from his time in service. He pulled down a small wooden box and opened it carefully. Inside were Camden's dog tags, the metal worn smooth from years of handling. He walked back and placed them gently in Riley's trembling hands. "He wanted you to have these. He said to tell you he wasn't perfect, that he made mistakes he can never fully fix. But he tried at the end to do the right thing." Riley took the tags and tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and sudden. "Thank you." Garrett sat back down, giving her space to process. He made a choice when it mattered. It doesn't erase what came before, but it counts for something. What's going to happen to him? He'll serve time, probably 5 to 7 years with his cooperation. But he won't serve the 25 he was facing. And when he gets out, he'll have a chance to rebuild, to be someone different. Riley nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at Rex, then at Sonny, and the pups sleeping in their pen by the window. "They're beautiful." Garrett smiled. "Yeah, they are." Riley stayed for a while longer, talking about her father, about the good man he had been before the gambling and the debts and the terrible choices. About her hope that prison might give him the chance to find that person again. When she finally left, Garrett stood on the porch and watched her drive away, feeling the weight of all the broken things in the world and the small efforts people made to repair them. Rex came to stand beside him, and Garrett rested his hand on the dog's graying head. "We did something good, boy." Rex's tail wagged once, a single beat of agreement. That evening, Helen came by with groceries and a bottle of wine she had been saving. They sat on the porch as the sun performed its nightly drama of color and light, watching Sunny play with her pups in the yard. The pups were growing fast, their legs still awkward, but gaining coordination daily. "You're going to keep them all, aren't you?" Helen's tone suggested she already knew the answer. Garrett took a sip of wine, letting it sit on his tongue. "Just Boone. The other two have homes lined up already. Good families who understand what they've been through." Helen nodded. "And Sunny? She stays. She's earned her peace. No more breeding, no more working, just being a dog." Helen smiled and leaned back in her chair. "You've changed, you know, since all this started." Garrett thought about it, watching Boone tumble over his own feet and get back up with puppyish determination. "Maybe. Or maybe I just found something worth fighting for again." "Either way, I'm glad you did." Helen raised her glass. "To second chances." Garrett clinked his glass against hers. "To second chances." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky cycled through its palette of colors. Gold to orange to deep purple to the first emergence of stars. Garrett thought about the path that had led him here. The mistakes that had driven him away from his old life. The losses that had made him believe he had nothing left to offer. The years of feeling adrift in a world that no longer made sense. And he thought about the moment he had heard Sonny's cry for help. The decision to stop instead of walking away. To care instead of remaining numb. It had not been dramatic, not cinematic, just a choice made by a man who was tired of being empty. But it had changed everything. A week later, Garrett stood in front of a crowd gathered at the local community center. Evova had organized the fundraiser and event to support the newly established rescue organization that had taken in the dogs recovered from the raids. There were maybe 100 people there, locals mixed with donors from Phoenix and beyond. Garrett had not wanted to speak. Public speaking had never been his strength. But Helen had insisted, and Eva had agreed, and somehow he had ended up at a podium with all those faces looking at him expectantly. He cleared his throat, feeling awkward and exposed. "I'm not good at speeches, so I'll keep this short." A few people in the audience chuckled, and the sound helped him relax slightly. 3 weeks ago, I found a Balk tied up and beaten behind a rental complex. I didn't know her name, didn't know her story. I just knew she needed help." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "What I didn't know was that helping her would lead to this, to all of you being here, to nearly 100 dogs getting a second chance at the lives they deserved." His voice grew stronger, more certain. We like to think that change happens because of big moments, dramatic gestures. But most of the time, it's the small choices that matter most. The choice to stop when you see something wrong instead of walking past. The choice to care about suffering instead of looking away because it's uncomfortable. He glanced at Helen sitting in the front row with Sunny and Boone beside her, both dogs calm and attentive. I spent a lot of years lost after I came back from service, looking for a mission, a purpose, something that mattered. Turns out the mission found me, in the form of a dog who refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier, and a community that refused to let injustice stand when it was brought into the light. He stepped back from the podium. Thank you, all of you, for caring enough to be here. The applause was loud and genuine, people rising to their feet. Eva was smiling from the back of the room, already filming for her follow-up story. Kit Dalton was there in civilian clothes, clapping along with everyone else. After the event ended and people began filtering out, Garrett walked outside with Rex and Boone. The pup was significantly bigger now, his legs stronger, his eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. He still had the slight build that had worried them those first days, but he was healthy and growing. Garrett crouched down and let Boone climb into his lap, the pup's enthusiasm unchanged despite his increasing size. You're going to be okay, little guy. Better than okay. Helen joined them, Sunny at her side. The two dogs touched noses in greeting, a gesture they had performed countless times, but which never seemed to lose its gentle significance. What now, Helen asked, though her tone suggested it was less a question than an invitation to speak his thoughts. Garrett stood, Boone tucked under one arm. Now we keep going. There are more operations like Vanessa's out there. More dogs suffering. More people who think they can get away with it because no one's paying attention. You're going to keep fighting. It was not a question, but Garrett nodded anyway. As long as it takes, Helen extended her hand. Then you're going to need help. A partner who knows the veterinary side, who can document abuse properly, who can testify in court when needed. He looked at her, understanding what she was offering. You sure? I'm sure. Helen's grip was firm when they shook. This matters, and I'm tired of patching up the aftermath without addressing the cause. They stood there as the last light faded from the sky, two people who had found purpose in the shared mission of protecting those who could not protect themselves. It was not dramatic. It was not the kind of moment that would make headlines, but it was real and it was enough. 6 months later, Garrett stood in the yard of his house watching Rex and Boone play in the evening light that turned everything golden. The house itself looked different now. Fresh paint covered the weathered wood. The fence had been properly repaired. The window no longer had plastic covering a crack. Small changes, but they transformed the place from a dwelling into a home. Inside, Helen was organizing files for their nonprofit, Second Chance K9. Haven had officially launched 3 months ago. They had helped place 40 dogs in the past half year, working with the law enforcement on 3 additional raids across Arizona and New Mexico. Garrett had testified before congressional committees about the need for stronger laws protecting animals from trafficking networks. The work was hard, the hours were long, the pay was essentially non-existent, but it mattered, and mattering was everything. Garrett's phone buzzed in his pocket, an email notification. He pulled it out and opened the message, recognizing Eva's address. She had been contacted by a source in Mexico, someone with information about another operation bigger and more sophisticated than Vanessa's network. International in scope, with connections that reached into legitimate breeding operations and dog shows. The email ended with a simple question. You and Garrett looked at Rex, graying but still strong, still ready. At Boone, who had grown into a healthy young dog, full of energy and loyalty. At the house that had become home, at the life he had built from the ruins of who he used to be. He typed a response, just 2 words, I'm in. Because some missions did not end when you completed the objective. They evolved. They expanded. They became not just a task, but a calling. And as long as there were dogs like Sunny fighting to survive and protect the lives they carried, there would be people like Garrett choosing to stand in the gap. He sent the email and then put the phone away. The sun was setting, painting the desert in its familiar palette of golds and reds. The air was cooling as it always did when day surrendered to night. Cicadas had begun their evening song, that sound that had become the soundtrack to transformation. Garrett sat on the porch steps and called the dogs to him. Rex settled at his left, solid and dependable as ever. Boone claimed his right side, all awkward enthusiasm and unconditional devotion. He rested his hands on both their heads and looked out at the horizon where the last light was fading. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new operations to expose, new people who needed to be stopped, new does who needed to be saved. But tonight in this moment, under this wide desert sky, there was peace. The peace that came from knowing you had done something that mattered, that you had chosen to care when indifference would have been easier, that you had stopped when you could have walked away. Somewhere in the distance, another dog was waiting. Another life hung in the balance depending on someone making the choice to see and to act. But Garrett was not worried, because he had learned something essential in these months. That one person's choice could ripple outward in ways impossible to predict. That caring was contagious. That standing up inspired others to stand beside you. The mission had found him when he had stopped looking for it, and he would not walk away, not now, not ever. The stars emerged one by one, ancient lights bearing witness to all the small acts of courage happening in the darkness below. And in a small house in the Arizona desert, a man who had once been lost sat with his dogs and understood finally that he had been found. Not by seeking, but by choosing to serve something larger than himself. The desert wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. The night deepened. The world continued its endless turning. And Garrett Holloway, former Navy SEAL, current guardian of the forgotten and abused, sat on his porch and felt for the first time in longer than he could remember completely at home in his own skin. This was not an ending. It was a beginning that would continue as long as there were creatures who needed protecting and people willing to protect them. And that was exactly how it should be.